We're here in the Central Methodist Hall in Westminster to remember the Holocaust, Holocaust Memorial Day, the murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazis, the murder of countless others, political prisoners, gypsies, homosexuals, and the mentally and physically disabled. And countless more since then in other places, slaughtered in Cambodia, in Rwanda, in the Sudan, and in Bosnia. Words cannot heal the pain of those who survived, their families taken from them and butchered. Words cannot assuage their loss. But words can help us remember and pass on from one generation to the next the terrible warning of the horrors that we human beings are capable of. And it's for that that today's ceremony is being held. This is the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz on the 27th of January, 1945, the concentration camp where over 1 million were killed. Among those here today, there are many representatives of British public life, members of the House of Commons and House of Lords, people from other organisations. But at the very heart of the gathering here are the 200 survivors of the Holocaust. Among them, Otto Deutsch. His father was taken away during Kristallnacht, and he managed to come to England, aged 87 now. The chief rabbi on the left there, Ephraim Mervis, sitting next to the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, and the chief rabbi will be speaking later on during the ceremonies. And there are others with different connections. Helena Bonham Carter there, whose grandfather saved the lives of thousands of Jews by helping them escape from France through Spain and Portugal when he was Spanish First Secretary. The Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition, the Deputy Prime Minister, Prince of Wales, and the Duchess of Cornwall. As the congregation sits, the events today are going to be narrated by the actor Adrian Lester.
Your Royal Highnesses, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on Holocaust Memorial Day. 70 years ago today, the concentration camp at Auschwitz-Birkenau was liberated by the Soviet army. Since then, the very word Auschwitz has become synonymous with one of the darkest chapters in human history, the Holocaust. We are here to remember the 6 million Jews that were persecuted and murdered by the Nazis. We reflect on the past and consider how we can play a part in creating a better future. We are joining communities across the UK who are holding events in their own neighbourhoods to keep alive the memory of the Holocaust, all victims of Nazi persecution and those who have suffered in subsequent genocides. We also pay tribute to all those who rescued and assisted people who were persecuted. We will hear from those who were murdered and those who survived those terrible times through music, through poetry, and through personal testimony. We start with the music of Victor Ullmann, a leading Jewish composer living in Prague before the war. Along with many other great artists of the time, he was sent to the Terezan ghetto, where he arranged several traditional Hebrew songs, including Eliyahu Hanuvi, sung now by the Aldborough Young Musicians, conducted by Simon Wolfish.
Elijah the prophet, may he soon come to us with the Messiah, son of David, sung there. And now John Hurt reads from Shema by Primo Levi.
You who live secure in your warm houses, who return at evening to find hot food and friendly faces, consider whether this is a man who labors in the mud, who knows no peace, who fights for a crust of bread, who dies at a yes or a no. Consider whether this is a woman without hair or name, with no more strength to remember, eyes empty, and womb cold as a frog in winter. Consider that this has been. I commend these words to you. Engrave them on your hearts when you are in your house, when you walk on your way, when you go to bed, when you rise. Repeat them to your children. Or may your house crumble. Disease render you powerless. Your offspring avert their faces from you.
Ladies and gentlemen, His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales.
The Holocaust is an unparalleled human tragedy and an act of evil unique in history. And it is for these reasons that we must always remember it and honor its Jewish victims and the Nazis' other victims. But Holocaust Memorial Day is not just a memorial to those 6 million innocent Jewish men, women, and children. It is also universal because the Jews in this story represent all of us. That is why the Holocaust is not just a Jewish tragedy, nor merely a dark page from the Second World War, but a warning and a lesson to all of us, of all faiths, in all times. The memory of this suffering and the unspeakable yet almost incredible details of the Nazis' diabolical enterprise can help future generations, wherever they may be, understand not just what happened across Europe, but how this came to happen, and why similar terrible things have happened in places such as Bosnia and Rwanda. I could have read from the writings of those like Anne Frank, who wrote so touchingly about their experiences. But what I find so deeply poignant and powerful are the 3 lines scratched anonymously into a wall by a victim of the Holocaust, which read, "I believe in the sun even when it's not shining. I believe in love even when I don't feel it. I believe in God even when he is silent."
When the Nazis came to power in 1933, few could have predicted how the world would be in 1945. Yet for the Jewish population of Europe, the gradual removal of their rights and freedoms by Nazi oppression started slowly. For Ibi Nil, as a young girl living in Czechoslovakia, her world started changing around her in frightening ways.
We lived in Bratislava, in the part where the embassies were, with a lovely big apartment. And as was usual in those days, we had a cook, we had a maid, we had a car, and life was easy.
In the Vienna of Otto Deutsch's childhood, Jews and non-Jews lived side by side. There was a close bond between his father and his neighbour.
My father and Mr. Kovac, Kurt Kovac, I remember his name so vividly, they were not only friends, but they were comrades in the First World War. They shared the same trench together. So we grew up almost as one family.
But in 1933, Hitler came to power with the aim of forcing the Jews out of Germany. Through 1,000 humiliations, the Jews were degraded and dehumanized.
You were made to wear a yellow star on the left side of your clothes. Most of shops put notes out they wouldn't serve Jews, and even the ones that did, you were supposed to be the last ones to be served. You couldn't sit down on public transport because you were going to contaminate the seat on which you sat. And I felt very, very angry about this.
I was told I could no longer be captain of the football team because the football team had to be 100% Aryan, non-Jewish. Well, when you're only 9 or 10, you wonder, what does it mean, be Aryan? Wasn't I a good goalkeeper? Where's the goalkeeper? And it hurt me.
On November the 9th, 1938, the Nazis orchestrated a night of looting and trashing Jewish shops, homes and synagogues. It was known as Kristallnacht. 91 Jews were murdered. Otto's father was denounced by his next-door neighbour.
At about 4 o'clock in the morning, it was still dark. A group of young Hitler youths burst into our room, broke into our room. But what shook me most of all is that they were led by the very same man whom I called Uncle Kurt, who was a friend of my father for 20-odd years. I can't understand how a man can do this. And he told them, there lies there's a Jew. And they took my father. I never saw my father again. I miss him now as I did then. My father was my friend.
Otto was lucky to escape. In 1938, he was one of 10,000 mainly Jewish children taken to Britain on a rescue mission called the Kindertransport. The Nazis forbade parents to show any emotion as they said goodbye to their children at the station.
Oh, I remember this so vividly. My mother turned her back on me. She knew if I was to see her weep, I wouldn't be such a man. Oh, I was a big man. I don't have to cry. You know, to this day, I regret that the last cuddle was denied to me.
Arto Deutsch, who's here today, whose family was wiped out by the Nazis. He was orphaned. Well, now the Finchley Children's Music Group are going to sing from Carl Davis's musical The Last Train to Tomorrow, which is about the Kindertransport, the 10,000 children who came to England from Nazi-occupied Europe, and they're going to sing goodbye to our treasures.
Impossible to believe they'd take our smaller possessions, lost treasured things. It breaks you down in small but crueler degrees to see them storm these trains as if we were mud on their boots, to have to cower back and watch them snatch and seize.
One of the 10,000 children who arrived in Britain on the Kindertransport was John Fieldsend, born Hans Heinrich Fieger. In 1946, John was sent a letter by the Red Cross, which had been discovered in a collection of photograph albums in his grandparents' house in Czechoslovakia. The letter was from his parents, and his mother wrote,
"Dear boys, when you receive this letter, the war will be over because our friendly messenger won't be able to send it earlier. We want to say farewell to you who were our dearest possessions in the world, and only for a short time we were able to keep you. Fate has not left us for months now. In January 1942, the Weilers were taken. We still don't know where to and whether they are still alive. In June, Grandmother Betty. In September, Aunt Marion, Uncle Willie and Paulie. In October, your Steiner grandparents. In November, your 90-year-old great-grandmother and the Bermans. In December, it will be our turn, and the time has therefore come for us to turn to you again and ask you to become good men and think of the years we were happy together. We are going into the unknown. Not a word is to be heard from those already taken. Thank the Comptons who have kept you from a similar fate. You took, of course, a piece of your poor parents' hearts with you when we decided to give you away. Give our thanks and gratitude to all who are good to you.
And a last word from their father. Your dear mother has told you about the hard fate of all our loved ones. We too won't be spared and will go bravely into the unknown with the hope that we shall yet see you again when God wills. Don't forget us and be good. I too thank all the good people who have accepted you so nobly.
The story moves on now to the fate of those who were left behind.
For those who didn't escape from Nazi-occupied Europe, like John's parents, Kurt and Trude, life became progressively harder and bleaker. Ghettos were established across Eastern Europe, specially selected areas where Jews were forced to live, where they were segregated, controlled, and dehumanized. In Poland alone, 600 ghettos were established. Conditions were appalling. Nazi persecution extended beyond the Jewish population, targeting anyone who did not fit the Aryan ideal.
Among the many communities which were persecuted were the Roma and Sinti populations of Eastern Europe. In 1943, Chaya Stojka and her family were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. When they arrived, her mother lied to the SS, telling them that 10-year-old Chaya was actually 16, but small for her age. This meant she was considered old enough to work in the forced labour section, rather than being sent to the gas chambers. That lie saved Chaya's life. More than 200,000 Roma and Sinti were murdered by the Nazis, including 194 members of Chaya's extended family.
Manfred Bernhardt and his sister Gerda grew up in a happy working-class family in Dortmund. At a very young age, he was diagnosed with water on the brain, epilepsy, and idiocy. Manfred was 13 when his parents reluctantly sent him to Applerbeck Asylum, a children's care home. They believed that he would benefit from doing farm work in the open air. But Applerbeck was part of a secret programme to rid Germany of those deemed unworthy of life. Children, like Manfred, were given overdoses of morphine and their consequent deaths ascribed to common ailments, so families weren't suspicious. 6 months after he arrived, the record stated that Manfred died of measles. He was one of more than 70,000 people with mental and physical disabilities to die at the hands of the Nazis.
German-born Rudolf Bratster was a young man in his 20s when he was arrested for being gay. Love letters and poems that he'd written to his partner were used against him. He spent time in various prisons and in 1942 was sent to Buchenwald concentration camp. Forced to wear a pink triangle, gay men were treated particularly badly. They were beaten, castrated, and subjected to gruesome medical experiments. After the war, Rudolf led a quiet life with his partner, Edward. They were together for nearly half a century. In 2008, he broke his long silence about the persecution he suffered under the Nazis and devoted the rest of his life to encouraging everyone to be vigilant against hatred and prejudice.
Camps had been established as soon as the Nazis came to power in 1933. But from 1941, murder of Europe's Jews was carried out on an industrial scale. Like so many Polish Jews, Renée Salt and her family were thrown out of their homes. The Nazis forced them from ghetto to ghetto, where they were starved, beaten, and subjected to a reign of terror. You may find the next film particularly upsetting.
One day they sent in some Polish workers and told them to install 10 gallows in the center. We knew something bad was going to happen, and yet we couldn't do anything. While they gathered hundreds of people to stand by and watch it, they hung 10 men together. And afterwards they would let them hang there for days on end so that everyone in the ghetto should have a chance to see it. And we thought that was bad enough.
But worse was to come. The Nazis promised Jews a better life if they agreed to leave the ghettos in cattle wagons. In fact, they were taken straight to death camps. The largest of these was Auschwitz-Birkenau.
When the empty cattle trucks returned, station cleaners found little notes in them saying that the people who are being taken to concentration camps where mass killing is taking place. We didn't and we couldn't believe it. But we had no options. So one day I found myself with my parents in the station. We were packed in very tightly into these waiting cattle trucks, always without food or water, no air.
No, I'm not quite sure how many people were in our truck. Must have been about 70 or 80, but anyway, there's no room to stand or sit. And of course, 2 buckets either end of the cattle truck. One bucket was for the water and the other one for the ablution, which was horrendous.
Now dawn was just breaking when the train slowed down and came to a stop. When you looked outside, it seemed that an army of SS men and Gestapo awaited the train, all heavily armed and with large guard dogs. They started screaming and bellowing, "Get off the train, get a move on, be quick." When my father jumped off, I jumped after him. By the time I jumped off, I didn't see him anymore. He disappeared. My 42-year-old father disappeared like into thin air. I never saw him again.
We could smell the incinerators, the smell of burning flesh. And that when we realized what was happening there.
At the end of the queue, the selection process was being conducted by the infamous Dr. Mengele, the butcher of Auschwitz. Wherever he saw 2 people holding hands, he would deliberately split them up. With a flick of his finger, he directed one to the right, one to the left, who should live and who should die. And all the people who went to the right went straight to a very large hole. They were taken, told to strip, leave the clothes on the benches. They all had their hair shaved.
Literally thousands, women, children, men, all naked, and they were all being shaved from the head, their bodies, and all their part of the hair. And all I remember, los, schnell, schnell, quicker, faster, faster. And you could see there's people just walking about with blood everywhere.
Men in striped pajamas with pliers were walking around opening people's mouths. And anybody that got to it just got yanked out.
They were pushed through some heavy doors into a room which looked like a shower room.
You didn't know until the water came down whether you were going to be showered or whether you were gassed, because it was in the same location.
Through these sleds, they would throw in canisters with a gas called Cyclone B. The screaming that was coming out of there, it's not possible to describe. It's just, you know, it was terrible. But after about 15 minutes, all was quiet.
Over 1 million people were exterminated at Auschwitz. By the end of the Holocaust, 6 million Jews had perished across Europe.
One of those in Auschwitz who had a different experience was Anita Lasker-Wolfish, a musician. She was forced to play in the camp orchestra. It seems extraordinary to us today not only that she found the energy and skill to play in conditions such as those, but also the ability to create beauty in the midst of those appalling conditions. Anita and others proved that the Nazis could not destroy what was in people's souls. Anita survived and is with us today. She rebuilt her life as a professional musician and raised a family of musicians. We will now hear Prayer from Jewish Life by Ernst Bloch, led by Anita's grandson, Simon Wolfish.
Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp, that turned my life into one long night, 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. Never shall I forget those flames that consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget that nocturnal silence that deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to ashes. Never shall I forget those things, even were I condemned to live as long as God himself. Never.
Many people knew that the Nazis were carrying out war crimes. Although the Soviet soldiers liberated Auschwitz in January 1945, the full horror of those crimes was not fully understood in Britain until British troops took control later that year of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Germany. With them was the broadcaster Richard Dimbleby.
I've seen many terrible sights in the last 5 years, but nothing approaching the dreadful interior of this hut at Belsen. I found a girl. She was a living skeleton. Impossible to gauge her age, for she had practically no hair left on her head, and her face was only a yellow parchment sheet with 2 holes in it for eyes. She was trying to cry, but had not enough strength. One woman, distraught to the point of madness, flung herself at a British soldier. She begged him to give her some milk for the tiny baby she held in her arms, because there was no milk in her breast. And when the soldier opened the bundle of rags to look at the child, he found it had been dead for days. I have never seen British soldiers so moved to cold fury as the men who opened the Belsen camp this week, and those of the police and the RAMC who are now on duty there, trying to save the prisoners who are not too far gone in starvation.
When the horror of the Holocaust became known to the world said, never again. But the truth is, in the 70 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, genocides have happened again and again. 50 years after the end of the Holocaust, an act of genocide took place in the Bosnian town of Srebrenica. 8,000 Muslim men and boys were massacred by the Bosnian Serb army. This year marks the 20th anniversary of that act of genocide, which followed years of war in the former Yugoslavia. Propaganda and persecution tore communities apart, and concentration camps were established, the most notorious of which was Omarska, where Kemal Pervanic was imprisoned.
I was born in a small Muslim village in Bosnia, and I really had a carefree life. I just played in the fields in the village. So it was a really, really nice childhood. This is the photograph of my class. This is Milojica, my Serb neighbor. He was a policeman after we finished school, and when I was in camp, he was one of my guards. The picture is a mixture of Muslim and Serb students, you know. If you look at the picture, we all look the same.
In the time it took Kemal to finish school, Yugoslavia had disintegrated into civil war. Serbian nationalists were determined to rid Bosnia of Muslims and Croats. Kemal was a Muslim. The Serb community saw him as the enemy.
On the 24th of May 1992, my village was shelled. And the next day, when we were ordered to surrender, I recognized a lot of my neighbors who attacked the village. We were told by the Serb authorities that we were going to stay for a while with neighbors or relatives in the 2 biggest towns in the region. We didn't ask any questions. If they told us we were going to end up in concentration camps, I guess we would run all over the place.
But Kemal did end up in Omarska camp, one of the most notorious detention centers in Bosnia.
We've seen nothing. We've seen one dining hall and 80 prisoners.
When British journalists visited Omarska in 1992, they were not allowed to see the 2,000 prisoners crammed in this warehouse.
One of the features of the Bosnian genocide was that at one level it was a planned operation taking place across the whole country at the same time. So the pattern was repeated everywhere in Bosnia. But on the other hand, there was also this local factor. The local perpetrators would persecute local Muslims.
The worst part of my experience was that I knew my guards and my torturers. This was very personal. For example, I was interrogated by my middle school teacher, and so he was my interrogator and my torturer. Most of the guards were coming up with new ways of humiliating and torturing people. People were being killed with blunt implements, with knives, iron bars, baseball bats, and so on. Any Serb could enter the camp and do to us whatever they liked. So there was one occasion when a group of local Serbs came to the camp, and one of my neighbors, called Emin, was, among other things, forced to mutilate with his teeth one of the guys.
There were cases of, in various camps across Bosnia, of quite unimaginable scenes of cruelty. People having their eyes gouged out. I mean, really bestial acts.
There was a ditch in this garage, and Emin was forced to go inside the ditch and drink some motor oil. I was literally a couple of meters away from this scene, and the screams that came from the garage still reverberate in my ears. It was the worst thing that I've ever had in my life. I witnessed what literally every human being is capable of if we are not kept in check.
There have always been brave people who stand up to and bear witness to persecution and hate crimes wherever they take place. Salman Grudovsky worked in the Auschwitz Sonderkommando. They were the strongest and fittest prisoners whose job was to burn and bury the dead bodies from the gas chambers, often their friends and family. Because of their intimate knowledge of the mass extermination taking place, the Sonderkommando were purged every 3 months to protect the Nazi secret. But still they found ways to ensure that what they had seen would never be forgotten. After the war, fragments of Sonderkommando testimony were found buried deep in the ashes of Auschwitz. In 1944, Salman Grudovsky left this for us. Dear finder, search everywhere, in every inch of ground. Dozens of documents are buried beneath it, mine and those of other persons, which will throw light on everything that happened here. Today we are leaving the crematorium. There are 170 remaining prisoners in the Sonderkommando. They are taking us to our deaths. I will bury this in the ash pits, because I believe that excavations will be carried out on this site in some distant future, in some other world. I ask myself, will you be able in the future to visualize the tragic world in which we lived?
Ladies and gentlemen, the Chief Rabbi, Rabbi Mervis.
Your Royal Highnesses, ladies and gentlemen, remembrance. What exactly do we mean by this term? In our tradition, we have a number of imperatives. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Remember the Exodus from Egypt. And most pertinently, remember all that which the Amalekites have done to you. And the Bible continues, do not forget. Now, if you're not forgetting, it means that you are remembering, and therefore the command, remember, must imply something else. It implies action. Remember proactively in order to guarantee that you will never forget. And therefore we remember the Sabbath day through meaningfully transforming a Saturday into a spiritual Shabbat. We remember the Exodus from Egypt through celebrating the wonderful festival of Passover. and we must remember what the Amalekites have perpetrated through the ages, through engaging in meaningful and constructive action. Now, as we mark 70 years since the end of the Holocaust, and we recall the horrors of the Holocaust and subsequent genocides, the survivors are calling out to us from the depths of their hearts, please keep the memory alive. And we must respond emphatically and adequately to their call through action. The action of education, in order that we all can recall the horrors of the past, so that together we can create a destiny of peace for our future. The action of confronting and neutralizing acts of wickedness and terror, in order that they should not spin out of control within our society. And the action of loving kindness, through reaching out with compassion beyond our own communities and faith groups to one and all, respecting the dignity of every single human being and the image of God which resides within every precious soul. Let us respond to the call of the survivors to remember the past proactively in order to guarantee a safe, peaceful, and promising future for all mankind.
Now we hear from Gina Turgel, who was born in Poland, was thrown into the ghetto and then into concentration camps. From Auschwitz, she was sent to Buchenwald and finally to Bergen-Belsen.
My story is the story of one survivor. It's also a story of 6 million others cannot tell. I was, and I always shall be, the witness to the mass murder of systematic destruction of civilization. Maybe that's why I was spared, so my testimony will serve as a memorial, like the candle that I light to the men, women, and children who have no voice. We do not speak with hatred or regrets. We simply put on our memory of our experiences for the future, not confined to the past. It's there to serve as an example for generations today and tomorrow. We will do our little bit as long as we can to assure that they will light a candle long after us.
In the gallery, 70 young people holding 70 candles to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. They're all young people who in one way or another keep the memory of the Holocaust alive through the various organizations that have been set up to do this.
I now invite their Royal Highnesses to the stage.
The 70 candles that were lit round the gallery are now going to be joined by 6 special candles lit by Holocaust survivors. Prince of Wales hands the flame to the first person to light a candle, Ben Helfgott, incarcerated in Poland and then in Buchenwald. And finally in Theresienstadt, where he was liberated. The second lit by Lily Ebert, Hungarian, deported to Auschwitz. The third candle lit by Sabina Miller, her family from Poland, forced to live in the Warsaw Ghetto, where they all contracted typhus. Her parents died. She escaped and survived the war. The next by Anne Kirk of the Kindertransport. Left Berlin for England just before the start of the war on the 19th of April 1939, never saw her parents again. And now Agnes Grunwald-Speer, a child survivor of the Holocaust. She was born in Budapest in July 1944, saved from deportation to Auschwitz, sent to the Budapest ghetto, liberated there in January 45. And the sixth candle, lit by Safet Vukalic, survivor of the Bosnian War, a Bosnian Muslim. While the candles are lit, the music A Song for My Father, played and composed by Frank Wildhorn, based on the life of the Jewish-Polish violinist Bronislaw Huberman, who was famous for founding the Palestine Philharmonic Orchestra, which provided a refuge for Jews from Nazi-occupied Europe in the years before the war broke out, nearly 1,000 of them and their families.
על משכבם ונאמר אמן.
The cantor Johnny Turgle singing El Male Rachamim, the Jewish prayer for the dead, in a special version for the victims of the Holocaust. And he is the grandson of two Holocaust survivors, Gina Turgle and Sam Gardner.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister.
2 years ago, on a family visit to Berlin, I sat in the shadow of the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe and tried to explain to my children the horror of what had happened in the Holocaust. In the museum there is the story of Jack Kagan, one of Britain's many inspirational Holocaust survivors. Jack's sister, mother, grandmother, and father were all taken from him and murdered by the Nazis. Jack tried to escape, he got frostbite, and he had his toes amputated. But he would not be beaten. After almost 5 months of tunnelling, he dug his way out of that camp and made it to the forest, where he joined the Bielski brothers and in an extraordinary resistance that saved 1,200 lives. Like so many of our incredible Holocaust survivors, Jack had been going into schools to share his testimony, reliving the most harrowing moments of humanity so that we should never forget. For years, our Holocaust survivors have seen this as their duty to us. Now, we must do our duty to them. It is time for Britain as a nation to stand together and say, we will remember. To say we will not allow any excuses for anti-Semitism in our country. We will not allow any form of prejudice destroy the multi-faith, multi-ethnic democracy that we are so proud to call our home. We will teach every generation the British values of respect and tolerance that we hold dear. And we will ensure that they can learn from the stories of our Holocaust survivors long after we are all gone. That is why today, with the full support of the Deputy Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, I'm accepting the recommendations of the Holocaust Commission. Britain will have a proper national memorial to the Holocaust in central London. We will have a world-class learning centre that teaches every generation to fight hatred, prejudice and intolerance in all its forms. Today we stand together, whatever our faith, whatever our creed, whatever our politics. We stand in remembrance of those who were murdered in the darkest hour of human history. We stand in admiration of what our Holocaust survivors have given to our country. And we stand united in our resolve to fight prejudice and discrimination in all its forms. We will keep Britain's promise to remember, today, tomorrow, and for every generation to come.
What I hope people will learn to be tolerant so that this can never happen again. But unfortunately, it's happening right now again. People haven't learned. But that won't stop me pleading for tolerance.
For the first 50 years after liberation, we didn't talk about it. But eventually we realized that if we won't talk about it, if we won't tell the world what happened, people won't know. And there are still now people who say it's propaganda, it never happened, it's all a lie. And that's why we speak out about it.
I think it's very important that people, young people, learn that the very difference makes life rich. That you have to value life, you have to appreciate people, and you have to treat them as you would like to be treated yourself. Because under the skin, we are all the same, and every person in their own way can make a difference.
We are not born alone, we don't live alone, we don't die alone. So we need to take into account lives of other people who live around us, and we need to look after them, not just after ourselves. We need to look after each other.
To bring this commemoration to a close, the song "I Believe in the Sun," referred to by the Prince of Wales in his speech, the words found written on the wall of a cellar in Cologne where Jews had been hiding, and it's sung by the Aldborough Young Musicians Choir.
I believe in the sun, though it is late in rising. I believe in love, though it is absent. I believe in love. I believe in love. I believe in love.
I believe in love. The final message then of this Holocaust Memorial Day, a message of hope. Hope that if the Holocaust is remembered and understood, we may one day learn how to avoid inflicting such horrendous cruelties on each other.